We title this Crowd Pleasers, and I know that all of you have at least seen the Thunderbirds or Blue Angels at some event. We're very, very fortunate today to have a leader of each of these organizations. On my right is Hoss Pearson, who is a command pilot of the Blue Angels. On my left is General Dan Cherry, who is a command pilot, commander of the Thunderbirds. This is a team effort. So we have Kurt Watson on the right, who flew with Hoss, and we have Ron Manus, did I say that right? You sure did. Who flew with General Cherry. Let's go through a little quick rundown. Hoss, how did you get into the military? What was your experience?
Well, I was an interesting story, and I don't think anybody's ever heard this story before. I used to be embarrassed to tell this story, but I was an Air Force ROTC at the University of Texas.
Yes.
And I flunked the physical to be a pilot. They told me my sitting height was too high, a quarter of an inch too high, and I couldn't be a pilot. And so the colonel said, well, no problem, I'll get you a waiver. I said, okay, when you get me the waiver, I'll sign the contract. So I got called back in his office about 3 or 4 months later, and he said, hey, you got to sign the contract today or drop. I said, well, did you get my waiver to go to pilot training? He said, no, but don't worry about that. You can be a navigator the first tour and be a pilot the second tour. I said, Colonel, I'm sorry, if I can't be a pilot, I don't want to be in the Air Force. I dropped. I walked across all the Navy ROTC. I said, hey, do you guys have a sitting height restriction? No, we don't have a sitting height restriction. We have an overall height restriction. You can't be over 6'5". You're well under that. So he takes me back, introduces me to a lieutenant. We talked for 15, 20 minutes. He reached down the bottom right-hand drawer of his desk, pulled out an airline ticket. They flew me to Dallas that weekend from Austin. Went to Dallas. I took the whole battery of tests, the physical and everything. Went back to school, didn't think anything about it. 3 months later, I got a letter from the Navy. I've been accepted for pilot training. Took a deep breath, called my dad, who was an Air Force guy, and I said, hey Dad, I just got accepted for pilot training in the Navy. What do you think about that? Long pause. Well, this was during the peak of Vietnam. My dad had been a POW in World War II. But after about 30 seconds, he said, it sounded like what you always wanted. And there I was. And it was off to the races, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, let me tell you a short story. One of the B-29 pilots that used to live here in the Twin Cities was about 6'6". And when he went through that height test, he actually kind of slunched down and buckled his knees a little bit and passed the test. So yeah,
Just shows you that the Air Force has much higher standards.
General Cherry, how did you get into the military?
Well, it was certainly a blessing for me that the Air Force agreed to accept me, I think. I was in trouble, not like Hoss was. I was in trouble academically in college. And I had started college right after high school, and I was basically having too much fun. And so my mom and dad, thank God for them, and they laid the law down to me. And one day they said, we're not sending you to school for grades like that. And in those days, you were subject to the draft if you didn't have a college deferment. So here I am, I'm scared to death that I'm going to be drafted into the Army. I'd always been interested in flying. I didn't have any aviators in my family, but my father was an aeronautical engineer. So when we moved around the country, we were always living someplace close to an airport. And my earliest childhood memories are of World War II pilots. And I remember those flashy silver wings that they used to wear, and somehow that seed got planted, I guess, very early. And then in my younger days, as we were traveling about, chasing my dad's employment with defense contractors, these really cool airplanes kept flying over our house. F-86s. I used to make models of all these airplanes, and so here I find myself, after completing a year and a half of college, that I'm really in trouble. And at the time, they did have an aviation cadet program, kind of a holdover from World War II and Korea, where if you could pass the physical and the mental exam, then you could come in, and after an intense year of both military and flying training, you got your wings and your commission. So I applied for that, was accepted to, pretty much like Haas did, they sent me very quickly down to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama to take this multi-day battery of tests. And I'll never forget, because I was feeling desperate anyway, but I'll never forget when I walked out after 2 days of testing. I'd never taken a test in my life where I didn't finish any section in the test. That's the way it's designed, but I didn't know that. And so I can remember walking out of there and saying, well, you better get another plan because this one's not going to work. I just knew I didn't pass it. But a couple weeks later, I got a wonderful phone call that said I'd been accepted. So I raised my right hand, took the oath, and came in. And 29 years later, I look back on those years with great fond memories. The Air Force was very good to me. Gave me wonderful opportunities. Primarily, you have people ask you all the time, do you miss it? You know, do you miss the flying? And you know, in reality, what you really miss are being around like-minded people. People like that you see sitting up here at this table. And you miss that a lot. That's why it's fun being here, Don, is to be able to interact with each other and see each other, kid each other, and generally love each other. That's what we do.
And a big thank you to all you people that are attending. With the drawdowns of our military, it's the folks that put on these air shows, when you see that volunteer on them, be sure and thank them, because I've been running these symposiums for probably 20 years between the Commemorative Air Force, and I have to pay real tribute to the organizers of these air shows. Tremendous amount of work, and we appreciate your support of that. Ron, I got a lot of education as I did a little prep for this. What did you do with the Thunderbird?
I had the pleasure of flying the boss, as I refer to my leader here, his left wing for 1 year. He flew the left wing of the succeeding commander leader, which ended up being Colonel Leo Smith. And that was in 1978, 1979. If you'll allow me, Don, tell a little bit about my story and how I got into aviation. I grew up on a little farm in North Carolina, out in the middle of nowhere, milking cows, feeding pigs, feeding chickens, and I knew I needed to take it out of there. It was not fun. I wasn't going to be a lifelong career there for me. My grandfather was a farmer raising watermelons and tobacco and cantaloupes. And on Sunday afternoons after church, family would all get together. My granddad said, hey, the Moore County Airport's about 5 miles away. He said, let's go out to the airport and see if J.C. Phillips is there. Well, J.C. had a little Cherokee 140, and so we went out there, and my granddad took me, and I was about 8 or 10 years old. I got to sit in his lap. I was so little, hold on that control wheel. J.C. let me hold on that control wheel. Boy, the hook went deep. And the good Lord gave me a dream. Basically, gave me a dream. And I knew that I needed a college education to fulfill that dream. And boss, you just mentioned model airplanes. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. I worked in tobacco fields in the summertime trying to earn money for school clothing, etc. My mom and dad gave me an allowance of 25 cents a week, and I saved my money and I bought airplane models. My mother hated that. They are dust collecting everywhere. I had every Century Series model known to man, but you know what? Another loss in Kurt. The first model I had was the four-ship Blue Angel model. How about that? So anyway, I worked hard in school. I had some challenges with academics, like the boss said. The local school I went to had 28 students for 12 years. I didn't teach any math at all. I had to take correspondence courses, algebra 1 and 2, plane geometry, trigonometry, calculus, all on my own. The teachers would give me the test. And I was fortunate enough to get accepted to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I majored in chemistry there. God knows why I never used it, but I'm sure I'll let you show. Is that a gorgeous son or what? So anyway, I was working about 3 or 4 jobs and borrowing money and trying to pay my way through school, and found out the ROTC paid $50 a month. And I was in. And so got into the FIP program, the flight instruction program. Between my junior and senior years, they gave us the contract out in local airport there. It took me 13 days to get the private license. I lived at this airport. And the last 2 hours that the Air Force paid for, I was sent across country to Raleigh-Durham, which is a controlled airport, had an air control tower and all that, where I was flying. We didn't have any of that to bother with. So I was nervous. And my last hour was my check ride. And I had this old crusty FAA guy that his wife must beat him every morning when he got out of bed. And I'm a positive feedback kind of guy. I'm not a negative feedback guy. I don't throw out that in the ring at all. So I'm nervous, and I got to talk to ground control, and I got to talk to tower, and I got to talk to departure control just to get out there to do my check ride. And I just be honest with you, I didn't do real well that day. And so we get down, and I'm thinking he's going to pull that pink slip out, and I'm going to have to go back to Chapel Hill and explain to all my buddies how I busted my very first check ride. And I'm really sweating. And I'll never forget this. He looked across the table at me, and he knew I was going in the military. And he says, "I'll tell you what, son, I'll give you your private license, but you'll never make it in the military." I longed to find where he lived after that, just to dust off his chimney. But I've been blessed in that regard, and the rest is history.
But you flew in formation with the company.
Yes, sir.
Kurt, I believe, if I recall the story, you actually flew solo?
Yes, sir.
Why don't you talk about how you got wedded to the Navy and to the flight program?
Do you want the Cliff Notes or the Paul Harden rest of the story?
Just a few minutes.
Well, my dream was always to play football, and I played at the University of Tennessee, and was drafted at the NFL. Got hurt, got cut. I just wasn't durable enough to make it to the NFL. So I was working for a truck line, and I was out skiing in Park City, Utah, and I ran into a guy that was with American Airlines. And I'd always been interested in aviation because my dad had owned an airplane with 5 other guys. It was a Piper Tri-Pacer. And he used to take us on vacations in the Tri-Pacer. And I was supposed to get my pilot's license when I got old enough, but he and his friends sold the airplane, and so I didn't have an airplane to fly, so I never got my license. So here I am now, been cut by the NFL. I'm working for a truck line and not enjoying it too much. And I ran into these set of guy from American that had been in the Navy. And I guess they had had such a reduction in force after Vietnam that they said, the Navy really needs people right now. You ought to look into naval aviation. And sure enough, that they, I was trying to, they had lowered the standards enough that I could make it. I mean, after playing college and a couple years in the NFL, name branding, and East Tennessee Public Education didn't help a lot, but I was accepted into naval aviation but I wasn't different from the other, things like, well, I said he was too tall, I was too fat. We were supposed to weigh 197 pounds for my height weight, and I hadn't weighed that since a sophomore in high school. The flight surgeon asked me if I had any questions. I said, yes, I had one. He had the chart right under my He said, well, you're not obese. Let's make you 2 inches taller. And that's how I got into naval aviation. And every year they would say, you know, you're too heavy, and flight surgeon would just kind of wave me on, and then finally I was on the team when I finally got a waiver to weigh what I did. But as I said, I looked into it after I started skiing, and I was accepted and went to Pensacola, and here I am.
Can you explain a little bit of the differences in flying solo with the Blue Angels versus formation?
I think Jim Ross was a solo pilot before me, put it best. When you're flying in the Diamond, you got to be able to hold your breath for 45 minutes. And then when you're flying a solo, you get a chance to breathe occasionally.
Don, Ron, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
I want the crowd to understand something that's very unique about Kurt Watson. Kurt flew number 7 as the narrator. He flew the dangerous demanding left wing as number 3. He flew slot as number 4, and he flew number 5 lead solo. And in all the teams that we've been around, including position is totally unique. The left wing is a hard position. The right wing, the slot is not an easy one either. The slot position for the Blues, Kurt was in charge of keeping that diamond together, critiquing the positions, training new wingmen, and I can guarantee you that transitioning to a solo position took a lot of hard work and skill. And my hat's off to Kurt. When I read this in the brochure and saw what he had done, I really was totally inspired.
You see these things. When my son graduated from the Air Force Academy, 94, the Thunderbirds flew over. Would that have been you guys?
Not in 94, but we did that, and that was something the team looks forward to every year. And of course, the whole objective for that is when the cadets are given the signal and they throw their hats in the air to signify that now they're officers, then the Thunderbirds are supposed to magically appear over the stadium, the football stadium, right at that very moment. And of course, just like everything we did, we went over the top trying to do it to perfection.
And as low as possible.
Always within FAA rules and regulations, of course. But seriously, I think, Don, that brings me to another thing about, I think about both teams, certainly the Thunderbird team, and that is what kept us safe in the air was total buy-in by everybody on the team, not just the pilots, but all the maintenance people and everybody associated with it. A total buy-in to this notion that there's a right way to do everything. And once someone joins the team and over a period of time where you're working to develop your flying skills and so forth, and that buy-in occurs, then the trust level is able to build as well. And flying the formations that the teams do fly, as close as we did, it requires not only a lot of efficiency, but a lot of trust as well. So we went over the top with this idea of there's a right way to do everything. And so it even boiled down to the type of pins you wore in your flight suit, where were they in there just exactly. There's a right way to put your pin in your flight suit. And we would critique each other unmercifully, about that sort of thing. And we even had a fine system, Don, so if someone showed up and maybe they didn't have their pin in their flight suit like they should, that they would have to pay. It could get really expensive too, I can tell you. But it all resulted in a a safe air show, and that's what we were after.
Well, the thing that, and I'd like to have both the teams comment. The observation that I saw, and I've seen both of you in multiple places, it almost looks like you've got an invisible rope between the planes. They, even when they do this type thing, it looks like the distance between the wings doesn't vary by an inch. Is that just with sheer practice, skill, all the above?
It's really all of the above, but you know, learning how to fly at Blue Angel or Thunderbird Air Show is a lot of work. And I know when I got to the team, I had already commanded a fighter squadron. I was a Navy test pilot before that. I'd been flying jets, you know, for a long time by this point. But it was the hardest thing I ever did, learning how to be the Blue Angel lead. You're learning to fly all over. And for the boss, you got to make a radio transmission before you move either hand. And you never move your feet. You know, and each year, half the team would be new. And so when we'd start training for the next year, it would be the 1st of December. And we'd go out in pairs, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. And one member of each one of those pairs would be new. And you're literally, I was trained my first year by my right wingman. And amazing to me, here's a guy that's 3 feet away from me, and he's critiquing me and telling me so many times, thousands of times before we put on our first air show, that they know exactly, if I say adding power, they know when the power is going to come up. So it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of practice. And Dan said, it's the trust that builds through this training process between the team goes through.
Well, I think that's what I think of too. When I think of the experience of being the leader of the Thunderbirds. Absolutely the most difficult job I ever had in my lifetime, but also the most rewarding, enjoyable job I ever had in my lifetime. But it's a lot of hard work, and this constant quest for perfection. We had this notion that there's a perfect air show out there somewhere to be flown. And we never did it. But every time we practiced, every time we took off for a real air show, we were trying for it. And then at the debriefing, believe me, you know, the rank comes off, you critique very, very straightforwardly, very honestly. Nothing gets swept under the rug. And it's all about safety and learning something every time you go airborne. So it was that constant quest for the perfect air show. We flew some that were pretty close to it, Ron. They were awesome. But we flew some that were way away from that perfection. But you learn every time. Looking for that perfect one. Somewhere out there, there's a perfect air show.
I think one thing that I learned from the boss and my teammates, there was never an excuse. There were no excuses. If we needed to center a maneuver, and we're graded, we're critiqued on this, we had an officer, a enlisted person on the ground, and I know the Blues do the same thing. We're not only videotaping this, but we have a person that's seen us do this hundreds of times. Nothing gets by this distance observation. It's taking notes of everything we do. From the march down, maybe my hand salute's a little late, or I'm late with my beanie, my oxygen mask didn't come on at exactly the right moment. You know, maintenance number 2 gets pinged, and usually it's a buck every time. But there were no excuses. Out here, the wind's blowing, and we're doing an air show, and one of the things that the boss was obligated to do, was in charge of in the solos, was to center that maneuver at a certain point in what we call the show line, so that all the perspectives look as good as they can to the crowd that's watching the show. If the wind were blowing 50 knots, tough. If it wasn't centered, it wasn't centered. We just didn't make excuses, and everything I think, for me personally, that I thrived on, it was an arena of black and whites, and I loved it. I loved it. And what happens is, when every team member, as the boss says, buys into the concept, and you're working together, close together, low to the ground, and you build that level of trust, and you build that level of camaraderie that I think is rare. Fighter squadrons and all aviators have this, I think, a certain amount of camaraderie. You think back to the airplanes you flew and the people you flew with. But to be in the environment that we were in constantly for a couple of years, you build a love for one another, because you have to be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and you give everything you have to make that happen. But again, how do you keep that perfect distance? Were there times when maybe a wing bumped? There were never any wings bumped on my team. That was not an option. No, let me answer that seriously. But if anybody bumped my wing, they didn't tell me. That's right. But it's back to the hard work thing and the training that goes into it. As Hoss said, during the training season, when you have new people joining the team, you don't start off flying these close, tight formations like that. You're flying a standard formation that every Air Force pilot in any squadron flies. You've got wingtip clearance, and you're not doing aerobatics. But again, you're starting to get comfortable with the Thunderbird's way of doing things, the radio calls, the decisions, and the boss's discipline about things. And then you go out on a two-shift to begin with. And then that two-shift gets tighter, and it's briefed every time. You get a little bit closer. The next thing, you might get a little bit lower to the ground to get everybody accustomed to the air show environment. And I know that one of the things we preached a lot was training season is roughly 3 months long. And there's no rush to get show ready until it's time to start the show season, which is usually mid-March. One of the things you had to be careful about is if everybody's coming along really well in their training, then the tendency is, well, let's start tightening it up. Let's get it right down there like an air show. But even though things may be going well, if you haven't put the time in, it's still not time to do this. To get it really tight. So it's a gradual thing, moving those airplanes in close like that, and then lower to the ground is a gradual thing too, until you get close to your first air show, and then even as the season goes on, the team gets better. And that's just the way it is. Kurt could tell us, having flown the left wing and slot pilot, about close proximity within the formation. And there's it's dynamic environments all the time. It's just that, you sit down here and we're a quarter of a mile away. You can't see the fact that we've moved a couple of inches, or maybe even a foot or two. But you're constantly moving. There's turbulence. It's bouncing you around, and on the left wing, in the spring, you'd have a lot of turbulence from these thunderstorms and everything. And after we pass through the funnel systems, we still have a lot of we used to call them bumps. And get out there, and you're flying along, and all of a sudden you get some rough air, and the next thing you know, you get the losses maybe 4 inches from my head. You're constantly correcting to get back into that position on the bearing line that we were flying.
again, it's 45 minutes of total concentration, holding that one particular spot, even though you're constantly moving around, trying to correct back to that perfect spot. You may not be there for a couple of seconds at a time, but you're always correcting back to it. And hopefully the amount of movement that you make during the course of the air show is minimal, and it's not as noticeable to people on the ground.
Hoss, the comments that General Cherry made, is that a similar process that you did with the
Their training program is probably identical. You know, it's a building block approach. You start out at 2,000 feet with 2 airplanes, you know, and introducing a new maneuver, you know, and you slowly introduce more maneuvers, introduce more airplanes, tighten up the formation and lower the altitude, but you don't do any of that until you reach something close to perfection at that stage. Like I said, it's all building block approach. But you know, to follow up on what Kurt was saying, being up in the front of the bus there, I mean, sometimes it's so turbulent, and my airplane is moving around so much, I'm wondering, how in the world can anybody be flying formation on me, you know? The first time where it really hit me in the face was in Chicago, and on Thursday and Friday on practice days, the wind was off the lake. But on Saturday, our first show day, the wind's coming through the buildings, and I'm telling you, if we're coming down around there, my airplane would just get beat up. And the call from the slot pilot at that time, Cowboy, okay, let's take it down the bearing a little bit. So we're flying a little bit looser. But again, as Kurt said, you probably couldn't even notice that from the ground. We're down a foot or so. But anyway, it was always.
Well, a question to General Cherry and Hoss. Did you fly other formations before you came flight leads? Or did you come in as flight leads?
I did not, but that has happened in the history of the Thunderbird team. I think, I'm not sure how many people have done that, but I know of 2 right offhand. Held positions at the Diamond at some time earlier in their career and then came back as the commander and leader later on. Now the prerequisites for the 2 positions, for the wing positions or the solo positions and the leader are different. As to be commander leader, you're more senior, you have to have more flying experience even to apply for the position. And so, but that does happen. In my case, the leader position was the first time I had joined the Thunderbird team.
That's the same for me too. I came in and it was the most intimidating thing I'd ever done. I came in as a commanding officer and the flight leader would go ahead. I didn't know how to fly through an air show. And I was scared, there's no doubt about it. If we got a ride, I joined the team as a newbie boss a couple months before I took over. And I got a ride in the slot. And like Chris said, you know, holding your breath for 40 minutes to 45 minutes, and that's not a joke. And I'm thinking, Harrison, you've done it this time. There ain't no way you can do this. And I mean, there's something happening all the time, and the boss has got a radio call going. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I thought, oh wow, I don't think I'll make it. And I thought that a lot during winter training too.
I know I can relate to that, Hoss, as well. Our selection process, when the initial cadre of applicants are kind of getting screened, you actually meet the team at the show site. One of the things you get to do is fly when the D-38 was in the cockpits. We had a seat in the back seat, so we could get a chance to ride in the back seat and observe. At show seats in the T-38, we removed the control stick from the back seat, so that when our crew chiefs were moving from show site to show site, we could flight control inputs, their knees, etc., would not interfere with what we were trying to do. So on this occasion, I'm an applicant, and
said, there's no way I can do this. I've been flying F-106s, F-4s, F-5s, as a progressive squadron, formation, you name it. And I'm going, I'll never make this. There's no way. I had those very thoughts. One advantage we had during our time on the team was, as Ronnie said, the two cockpits of the team really helped. So I got a chance to, in my very first training missions that I flew, to learn how to be the leader. I had the previous leader sitting in my back seat, which was really helpful. And then it became a wingman's responsibility to critique me. But again, as Haas said, as a leader, what you're really striving for is not only safety in it all, but consistency. If you're doing a role, if you think about a Thunderbirds or a Blue Angels air show, all the maneuvers are really some form of a loop or a roll. Everything's either a form of a loop or a roll. So the new leader's job is to try to be able to fly a basic roll, in a very consistent way. The guys out on the wing are good at what they do, and they can stick with you through most everything as long as you do it the same way every time. And so you try to be smooth and consistent with your roll rate, and if you're doing a pull for a loop, you want the G on set to come on just the same way every time. And as Haas said, the radio calls have to go down too. So
I don't want to take anything away from your two leaders. Looks to me like the guys on the wings are the guys that really have the hard job. Is that fair to say?
that's right.
I have to compliment Boss Person because one of the things we did when you take we had the 7 jet, which was 2 seat, and it had a J52 P6 engine in it, which had approximately 4,000 pounds less thrust than the 7 seat jets. And so when I would take somebody for a ride in the slot, they weren't done just the entry didn't have enough energy coming into a loop, and I would just fall out. Completely fall out. And just kind of chasing around the loop. But Ross being a test pilot, he always was just right in, right speeds. And the guys before me that had tried to take those rides in the people who ride in the 7 jet in the slot fall out of the loops usually. And Boss, every time I took somebody in the slot, I never fell out of the loops. He always had the speed going in, and so there's a lot to be said about this car on the front because
Well, I wouldn't try and take anything away from it because I want to be sure that I don't have to puncture tires when I drive late enough.
well, I did that in Lakehurst.
I think I could add to that, Kurt saying, and I know this is true for Haas and it was for General Cheery. He often said that to put me to sleep on the way, that when the boss talks about consistency, and I can hear that voice in my headset, and it was so consistent every time. I knew exactly what he was going to do by the tone of his voice and the words that were coming through. And I can give you every voice command that we flew just about every maneuver 30-some years later. For instance, a diamond roll. We'd be in a left turn, lining up for the runway, and the boss would have us in this turn. He'd say, back right all the way. Stand by, smoke already. Nose coming up, rolling left and roll. And on the R, the roll start. You get just about to the inverted, he says, now into the flow. We keep the turn coming, he'd say, about time we need to start loading the airplane back up, he'd go back into the pull. And he'd say, and if you had it set perfect, he'd say, hold it right there. If you needed just a little more flow, he'd say, a little more time, a little bit. Smoke off ready now, power up, back around left for the 9 loop. And so that's how it flowed in the cockpit. And believe you me, and I know Kurt can say this for Paul's, and I can say this for my boss. It was music and comfort in my ear. I knew that if I stayed on his wing, I was going to do well. And, we talk about this trust thing, and trust goes both ways. I've got to trust my leader that he's going to put me in the right place each and every time. And he's got to trust me, knowing that I'm committed to being in a position that he expects me to be. I don't care if it's 2 G's or 6 G's, I'm going to be there. I'm not going to sag. I'm not going to get low. So that's a special kind of relationship that the 4 of us, I think, have still treasured to this day.
Ron, what was your call sign?
When I was in the aggressors, I was madness. Madness.
Believe me, I lived up to it. Cherry, what was your call sign?
Boss.
No, in the Thunderbird, before you were in the, did you have a call sign?
I did not.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, Hoss. You used to often the Hoss, right?
Yeah, I was awesome.
It was Boss Hoss.
Oh, is that?
He was Boss Hoss.
Awesome.
I was Grizz.
Chris.
Grizz, like a grizzly bear.
Oh.
When I was in high school,
From your football days.
somebody said you're as big as a grizzly bear, and it's
Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about that. 2 observations. If you've been in the tent, their bills are opposite each other over on the far aisle of the tent. And the mutual respect that these guys have for each other, I just kind of stood back and listened to them. But it was a rare thing for me to see that and know the effort went into striving for that perfection, I guess is the best way to describe it, that they had for each other and the effort. We as civilians, now you being civilians, closer to it, but we owe a lot to them. And with respect to this critique, I went over, see these T6s flying over at our air show here. I went over and listened to them do a little debrief the other day, and your comments about, hey, you were a little too high, a little too low, you did this, you did that. Even with these 100-mile-an-hour T6s flying over here, some of the same comments. So I appreciate that. That's an important.
I think one of the things that would be remiss if we didn't mention is, we talk about the trust that we had among the pilots, but probably just as important was the trust that we had in our maintenance. I mean, these kids were they were the best of the best. And if you had a problem with an airplane, they would be out there till 1 o'clock in the morning until they had that airplane ready to go the next day. And then they'd be right back out there at 5 o'clock in the morning to do morning turns and make sure that they were still ready to go for the show. And as the Blue Angels, we can kind of brag that we have never canceled an air show because of a maintenance problem.
How many, just starting down here on my right, how many air shows did you fly in here?
Oh, geez, I didn't count them, but it was approximately 80 shows a year for 4 years. Well, I flew for 3 years, so we did about 80 shows a year. 80, yeah.
Okay.
About 40 different show sites. We fly, 77 shows usually.
I flew 150 a year.
I don't know, but I would guess.
Keep along to that.
Well, and, again, if you, air shows are certainly important, but every time we took off on a practice or, a training mission, whatever it was, you go through the same demand for excellence, and so you don't fly practice any differently than you do a real air show. And, roughly speaking, I guess we did, Ronnie, about 80 to 90 a year, and so in 2 years on the team, probably
160 or better. I would say most people don't understand. I know. Also remember our solo pilot Scarborough would talk about what we did as compared it to being a professional athlete. You see the top tour golfers out there. They're banging away hours let's say for instance, we start out on Monday, we'd be coming home from a show. Tuesday, we'd probably fly at least one, maybe two hops of practice, and as the boss has said, that's a basic air show in and of itself. We might be concentrating on specific maneuvers, and the sequence might be different based on what we felt like we needed more practice on. Same on Wednesday, we probably flew another sortie on Thursday, down in the afternoon prepping for our deployment on Friday. We'd fly somewhere, and as the boss said, it didn't matter if it was a cross-country flight or rival maneuvers, the briefings, the debriefings, the critiques for everything we did was consistent every sortie. The air show on Saturday, typically we enjoyed multiple day shows because we got to relax a little bit. We didn't have to check in out of a hotel room. Say that for us it was very common to have an air show on a Saturday. Get up, go through the public relations debriefings that evening after the show. Get up early the next morning, load up, check out the hotel, get to the jets, do a transition to a new show cycle, arrival maneuvers, land, debrief, brief the FAA, get ready for our air show. Fly another air show that day, public relations events, debriefings afterwards. Pack up on Monday, go home, and repeat the process. So it required a lot of practice. We didn't like to go more than 2 or 3 days without flying together. That was, we would be, I think, maybe a little more cautious, and we had a little downtime between the ability to fly. So,
Well, I had some exposure in the Twin Cities with the Airport Commission and the FAA, not directly, but peripherally. And many of you may have seen the flyover of the All-Star game here on Tuesday. Those planes look awfully low. Can you comment on the process of being able to fly over a metropolitan area that those at 800 feet or something like that? Any of them? Process to do that? Does the team do that? Do they have people going through all that clear hours?
Well, you always work very, very closely with the FAA, and there are rules that you have to fly. You have to comply with them. They are the same. And that's one of the leader's jobs as well, is to interact with the monitor from the FAA at every show site. Every show site is different. Every show site has different challenges. And one of the big benefits we would get from our positive relationship with the Blue Angels, over time, the teams would typically fly in the same places. And we would learn something about Chicago, for instance, and we would be quick to pass it on to the Blues because we knew next year they were going to be there. If we learned something about the show line being squirrely or a mountain or some sort of obstruction that didn't used to be there, you know, we would try to share that information as much as possible. But we were very, very strict and disciplined in what we did. There's a requirement to have a 1,500-foot clear zone between the aerobatic show line and the crown line. And I'll tell you a little story here. I remember one time flying down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we had an FAA monitor that was brand new to the job. He never monitored an air show. And so we came in for our arrival maneuvers, and it was a big air show. Bob Hoover was there and everything. And so Bob Hoover and myself and several of the other air show performers were meeting with the FAA monitor after we had flown our arrival maneuvers. And the FAA monitor was all over me, accused me of flying inside the show line, too close to the crowd. And I knew I had, there wasn't a big crosswind, and we have aerial photographs, we know exactly where we were. And he just wouldn't let up. And he was telling me that I had to modify my show sequence to fly the air show that afternoon. And I was telling him that that was not going to happen. And because if anything helps us with our quest for safety, it's again the consistency of the routines. he got tired of hearing this stuff. And he put his finger in his chest. And he said, I watched those private maneuvers. They didn't crowd the show line. Dan is professional. These guys are professionals. They're not trying to do anything abnormal. And you need to back off. All right. He backed off.
Well, again, when they flew over Target Field, it looked like they were 800 feet above, and they flew right over the stadium. Is that usual?
It's all different. Let me say one thing about fireworks. At least for us, when we were on the team, we didn't want to do that. It's as much work to get the 6 jets in the right place, but doing a low pass, I mean, that's something we do every air show. You know, at some place during the show, we're gonna do a low pass, even if it's at the end of the show. So doing a low pass is just not that big a deal. But to get everybody briefed and ready to go and in the right place, in '84 doing the flyover for the Naval Academy graduation, Ronald Reagan was the speaker, and they had a tent to the side of the stadium. So because the president was there, we were not allowed to fly over the president, so we weren't allowed to fly over the stadium. So we were supposed to fly right abeam the stadium, you know, and just above it. And there's a rep up at the top of the stand there telling us, okay, the president is going into the stadium. So we come in, the president turns around and goes back into the tent. Right over Ronald Reagan. At a very low altitude with a smoke on. But, you know, and the rep, you know, got upset. It was Secret Service rep. But, hey, you would never see it. But anyway, flyovers are a pain, you know, and I know both teams have done that recently, and, you know, and it's a great boon for recruiting, and you know, I'm glad they're doing it, but it's a lot of work, you know, it's not simple.
Well, let me say just one more thing about Don, where you're talking about minimum altitude. First, I wasn't here to watch the All-Star game and that flyover. I did see a video of it, and I thought the team looked really good. I was very proud of the way the formation looked. But typically, when you're flying over a stadium like that, you don't want low altitude because you're interested in the crowd being able to see you for the longest period of time. And as Haas said, in a football stadium, you get down too low and they only see you for a moment. So you have to, that requires a modification of your show sequence that is somewhat difficult for us because we're at 100 feet every time. But sometimes there are obstructions in situations so you just can't do that. And so that requires another decision.
Listen, we're to the end. I'd like to throw it open for some Q&A. Is there one or two? Yes.
I have a question. What's the difference between you guys and you guys? Is it the shows you do?
Are you trying to start a fight?
I want to get along really good. But is it shows, aircraft, or just there's just the way?
You know, that's a great question. You guys fly the F-16s, right?
That's right. The current team flies the F-16.
This is Air Force. These guys are Navy. What do you fly?
F-18s.
F-18s. Good question, though. Yes, sir.
How are you selected to become a pilot for this, applying for this sort of thing?
Question is how they selected.
And how long you stay on?
I'll try to answer that from the Air Force perspective. Each year, a message is sent out to all the troops out there that we're opening up the process for certain positions on the team. Normally, in our regard, as we've discussed, you normally have half the team flying have already had a year's experience. It's a 2-year tour, and the new people coming on would be the other half. In our case, when I came on the team, we were hiring a left wing with a slot pilot and a solo pilot. So you gather applications. applications. This process may have changed. What I'm describing is what I went through as I was chosen for the team. The applications come in, the team goes through those individually. They screen looking at past experience, flying experience, formation experience, fitness reports, professional schooling, and all the professional aspects that go along with the BBA itself. Recommendations that come from commanders and other individuals that these people may have flown with or have been commanded by, and then a certain number are selected as semi-finalists, if you will. That number may vary depending on how many applications you receive. And each person then is assigned an air show to be at, to meet the team, to socialize with the team. One of the most important things we do is to present ourselves in a social environment, and also, as ambassadors in blue. We're there to represent the Air Force and the people in the Air Force.
You're there to represent this country, guys. Regardless of the Air Force or Navy.
That's really important. And so social skills and the ability to interact with people, to make them feel important and to share your experiences with them is important. So that's being evaluated by the team members. I mentioned the little flight I had in the back seat. That's another thing that you get to experience. And so after the team has screened the semifinalists basically, then the finalists are selected. And that number is reduced to maybe 5 or 6, something like that, as I recall, maybe usually twice the number. Yeah, twice the number of positions that you're going to have. And so you travel to Nellis, and as Hoss is related, we talk about nervous and scared and intimidated. When you get around having been in a normal Air Force squadron and being a fighter pilot, and now you see, you witness firsthand the expertise and the demands and the expectations that they have on one another. It's pretty intimidating, but you travel there, you get to fly with the team, and the 38, as Boss Cherry has mentioned, we had the advantage of having a back seat, so we had the leader and a wingman in his back seat. I flew with Lacey Beach, who was the solo pilot. He was in the front seat, I was in the back seat, and then we had another airplane with the other 2 pilots chasing us. And you're being evaluated. I'm not sure what that criteria was, because I did a lousy job, I thought. You're scared to death. And I was flying the F-5 at the time. I'd flown the T-38 pilot training. I'd flown a little bit in the Pressure Squadron, but it's a little bit different. And I think more than anything, we do a loop and a roll. We did some solo maneuvers, and the team's watching you. And I felt like I wasn't there to try to impress them, because I had nowhere close to the flying skills that they had or I needed to have to be on the team. But what I could demonstrate to them was good judgment and not putting myself in a position where I would compromise them or myself as an aviator in that environment during that test flight. And so you complete that. There are a series of interviews. I'll never forget, I'm in my dress blues, and the team is sitting around the table. We've got the leader at the head, and we've got number 2 here, number 3 here, number 4 here, number 5 here. And they're in their flight suits, the nice flight suits that they wear, and I walk in with my Air Force blues on, and you're at attention and you salute, and it's a pretty intense interview with some pretty pointed questions. They're trying to evaluate how you perform under pressure, how you would react in certain situations. You're then interviewed by a higher level of command. And in those days, for us at least, I don't know how the process is, and I can't speak for it now, but the team closed the door and chose their new team members. And I'll remember to the day I take my last breath. I'm sitting in my office. I was a check pilot in the aggressor squadron, and the boss walks in, and it's number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. They had their black flight suits on that thing, which I thought was kind of an ominous sign. And Boss Cherry walks up to me and says, reached out his hand and says, "Ronnie, congratulations, you're a new left wingman." And I get cold chills to this day. My hair standing up on my arms.
Well, listen, we've got to draw this down. These guys are over in the tent. I invite you to go over and spend some time. There's probably some questions that have come up during this. I will tell you this, the air show folks, the organizers, have tried to get Blue Angels, Thunderbirds to this show, but because of all the criteria of houses right over there, and you'd think maybe the River Valley would be a buffer that would allow something to come in, but it's an awesome thing. I encourage you to go in, and again, to you guys that are on the panel and the other folks that are in the booth, your job is so important in representing our country today because of the drawdown in our military. Thank you for your great work and public relations with the taxpayer that needs the support of all of us as a nation. Thanks so much for coming. We've got another symposium after this on helicopters. Thanks for coming. See you soon.